Okay, this is just to introduce the concept of travel literature. Um, what is travel literature? What do we mean by this? Or what do I mean by this? People can use it in different ways, but well, there's nonfiction, and there's fiction, and there are some things that it's not clear what they are. They might be fiction or nonfiction or somewhere in between. I'll explain. Um, it can be about a journey, or it can just be about some faraway place. So, generally speaking. Now, nonfiction can include guidebooks. They're not very interesting from a literary standpoint, I guess. Although, we still have very, very old examples. Historians like these. So if you go to the bookstore today, you'll find lots of MOOC magazines. I read Lonely Planet, any insight guides, anything like that, that tells you where to travel, where to stay, what to see. Nowadays, we have the internet for all that, so maybe you don't use books like that anymore. But I guess that's still a kind of travel literature, whatever you have on your phone. A step away from that is journalism or essays. Many people write nonfiction travel books that aren't instructions in how to travel, but that are telling giving more background or saying interesting things about the place. One example that I was exposed to early on was Andrew Harvey wrote a book called A Journey in Ladakh. Ladakh is in northern India, and after he wrote that book, a lot of people wanted to go to North India and see the place he wrote about. Now, there are many books like that. This blends into memoir. If it's more about, a memoir is if you write your story, or a part of your story. So if the book is more about you, it's a memoir. If it's more about the place or the journey, I guess it's more in here. But it can be hard to distinguish them. Andrew Harvey's book was memoir. He's writing about his own, not only his own travels, but what he was feeling, what he was thinking about his spiritual quest. He was kind of a poet, and he was interested in Buddhism. So while traveling in Ladakh, he thought about things like this. Eat, Pray, Love is a famous modern example. The author went to Italy, where she ate very well, and then to India, where she meditated, it's kind of like praying, and then to Bali in Indonesia, where she fell in love. It's based on a true story. She really did go to those places, and she did marry a man that she met in Bali. He's actually Brazilian. It's possible that some parts of it were changed, that people have identified things that couldn't have happened the way she wrote. Well, which brings us to the fiction part. Fiction has to tell a story. If it doesn't tell a story, if the story is not good, it's not good fiction, right? You're allowed to lie. In fact, it's not expected to be true. So the more a book, even if it says it's nonfiction, if it's put into a narrative, you begin to think that it's been fictionalized. Here are some examples of travel fiction that you often find. There's quest stories. A quest is if there's something you have to get and come back with, or something you have to go and find. The Lord of the Rings is a quest story. Their quest was to throw the ring into the volcano. The Holy Grail was a quest to find the cup used by Jesus Christ, and it had magic powers. Maybe it wasn't a cup, maybe it was something else, a plate or a stone. But it almost doesn't matter what you're looking for. You have to find it, maybe bring it back, maybe it's just enough to find it. And many video games have this pattern, right? And on the way, many adventures happen. Otherwise, the quest isn't very fun. A voyage and return, if you go to some dangerous place and come back. Maybe a quest, maybe not. There can be spiritual journeys where the place you go is not a physical place, but another world. When I was growing up, many people read books by Carlos Castaneda. Carlos Castaneda was a Peruvian anthropologist who studied the Yaqui Indians of Mexico. And in particular, he studied their idea of magic. And they took drugs, peyote, cactus, and some other things, as a part of their magic. And when Carlos Castaneda began doing this and following their rituals, he began to believe that the magic was real. The things that they talked about, he wasn't just writing about them, he was seeing them. He actually had to quit because he was afraid in the first book. But he went back, and there were many more books. So this is a spiritual journey. He did some traveling, but that wasn't so important. He went to, I believe it was New Mexico. But the most important travels were to the other world, the world where these allies, these spirit beings lived. It's around us. It's not a different place than the place we live, but you have to see with different eyes. And so it's an interesting idea, right? Would you like it to be true if everything around us was, if there was a magical world all around us, and you could, if you knew the right techniques, you could enter that world, maybe do magic, or maybe you would find things, frightening things, monsters, witches, demons. Well, anyway, that's a spiritual journey. You can have allegories. An allegory is a story where every part of the story means something in particular. And I'm thinking of John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. Pilgrim was the hero of Pilgrim's Progress, and he is trying to get to the celestial city. It's heaven. Pilgrim stands for, all of us, every man. But on the way, before he gets there, he has obstacles, and they all have names that make it very obvious what it's about. For example, Vanity Fair. Vanities are things you don't really need but are fun, like, playing cards. Disapproved of those in the Middle Ages. And if you stay too long in Vanity Fair, you may forget about the heavenly city. So that's one problem. Anyway, there were others. And of course he had helpers and enemies and others on his travels. It's very obvious what every part means. So that's an allegory. The Narnia books from C.S. Lewis are also allegories. Aslan, the lion, is Jesus. It's obvious from the story. And and the witch is the devil, and you can go on from there. The Lord of the Rings books are not allegories. The ring is a symbol. It might mean different things. You can argue about it, but it's not entirely clear. You can argue about it. It doesn't have just one clear meaning. So, anyway, these are different forms that fiction could take. Fiction about travel. And if you see a travel story following one of these forms, then that's a sign that it probably is fictionalized to some extent. I mentioned that there are stories that are somewhere between fiction and nonfiction. Even if we tell something that's mostly true, we might make the story better. And on the other hand, if I write a novel, I'll probably base some of that novel on things that have happened to me or things I know about. Maybe the whole book will be true, but I'll only change the names. That's called a roman à clef, a novel with a key. So if you know who the characters are, everything is true. And nonfiction can be lies. Here are some authors who are the authors of works like this. George Psalmanazar is a famous writer. He became famous in London. Here is his book and his image. He claimed, centuries ago, he claimed that he was a Taiwanese Aborigine. And he said this in London, when most people didn't know anything about Taiwan. They barely knew much about Japan, and they believed him. Here are some pictures of Taiwan people from his book. These are lies. He wasn't Taiwanese. He was from the border of France and Germany. Eventually people found out, and he apologized and admitted it. They never, but it was an interesting lie. Here's more images from Taiwan. This is Taiwan religion. Yes. He also wrote an alphabet, a Formosan alphabet, that he said was used by Aborigines here. I've always thought they should bring it back, bring it into existence, use it for something. Anyway, so he claimed that his book was nonfiction, but it was lies. To find a point on it. Well, there are many people like him. Mary Summer Rain was a New Age writer who claimed to be initiated into American Indian wisdom by an old Indian woman. It seems that she made the whole story up. There might have been an old woman, but she wasn't Indian. So, a New Age writer pretending, because a lot of people were interested in Indians, American Indians, in the 1970s, 1980s. So she wrote a book that would make these people buy her book. And real American Indians were horrified. They're saying, this is nonsense. This shouldn't be allowed. But, she was famous for a while. Brooke Medicine Eagle was the same sort of person. The same sort of book. Oh, here's one that I read when I was a teenager. T. Losang Rampa. T stands for Tuesday. Losang Rampa wrote a number of books. He said he was a Tibetan. His books were about his life in Tibet. Shizan. Actually, he was from Britain. He never went to Tibet or anywhere very close to Tibet. He had a real name. His real name was not Losang Rampa. So he lied. Or did he? People found out who wrote it. People found out, and they says, your books, they're lies, aren't they? And he says, no, they're probably memories of my previous life. So in his previous life, he was a Tibetan, and now he is British. So, in his books, he wrote, for example, he explained that in Tibet, the lamas are able to fly using giant kites. Normally, we just fly them, but if you ever flown a kite and you said, can you make a really big kite and put a person underneath? So they do this in Tibet, he says. That's one unlikely thing that he reported. There were many others. There were hidden caves underneath the Potala Palace, and so on. Here's another author that I read when I was young, Deng Mingdao. He wrote about his books were about Taoism, Daojiao. And when he was a young man in China, he wandered from place to place, and he, studying Taoism. Okay, that might be true, you say. There were such people. He met gods. Okay, that seems less likely to be true. Anyway, there are people on the internet discussing who this man was, and where did all this come from? So that was, many people, our exposure to, other countries come from people who seem to be lying about them. It's sad, funny, sad, interesting, but here we are. This is fiction pretending to be nonfiction. Is there nonfiction pretending to be fiction? I guess there could be, but I don't know of any examples from travel literature. There are many, like I said, a roman à clef is a book that is fiction, but it's basically true. They just changed the names. But I don't know of travel literature like that. So maybe someone will find one. Okay, this is just an introduction to the general idea of what is travel literature. So now you can find, some category to put them in when you see one. Okay, stop.